Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Singer Lucio, and I'm the ADA coordinator for the University of Maryland.
Hello, my name is Ray Nardella. Use he, him pronouns. I serve as the Assistant Director of Resident Life for Student Conduct here at the University of Maryland.
Great. Thanks, Ray. Welcome. We're happy to have you here today. I wanted to talk with you a little bit about you and your life on campus with a disability, so you can tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work here at UMD. I serve as one of the assistant directors in resident life. And so I oversee student conduct for our residence halls and our public-private partnership facilities, so commons and courtyards. I've been here about 9 years, originally from Connecticut. My background is in clinical mental health counseling and law. And I identify as a disabled person. I have Tourettes syndrome and some comorbidities that come along with that, notably OCD and some other behavioral-based disabilities. The past 10 years or so, I've gotten more involved in the advocacy space around Tourettes and neurodiversity. And I'm looking forward to chatting about the ADA and.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what it was like learning you had a disability.
Yeah, I was in denial for a very long time. It wasn't until probably the middle of graduate school, so 21, 22 years old, where I finally would say the words Tourettes or OCD, ADHD. Prior to that, I just wouldn't talk about it. I would ignore folks who inquired about my tics or my symptoms. Shame, embarrassment, a lot of the commonalities there. But I was diagnosed at 12, and from 12 to about 20, 21, 22, it was just a big state of denial. I would live with it, and I would be on medication for it. But this acceptance of it really wasn't there until probably about 9 or 10 years ago.
Has it affected you differently at different stages of your life?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, growing up, elementary, middle, high school, experienced bullying and a lot of common things that folks with disabilities, tend to experience, unfortunately. As I went through college, had a lot of friends, were in a lot of, student clubs and organizations. So I kind of did my best to let that sit at the forefront as opposed to my Tourette's. As I get older now, in my early 30s, and into my 20s and now my early 30s, I am realizing that being an adult, a real adult, whatever that means, is very different with a disability. There's different life circumstances that I have to be aware of relative to my Tourette's and my tics. There's relationships now that I have to incorporate into my disability, and those weren't necessarily there in my teens and most of my 20s.
As you've come to accept it more, have you found other people have come to accept it more?
Yes. Yeah, I would say so. I think that most people who I tell about the Tourette's genuinely are interested in it. I think in a lot of the co-occurring disability as well, they're genuinely interested in, it's relatively rare of a disability, so they want to know more about it. There's an authentic desire to be educated. I think, and I don't think I could say that wasn't always there. I think if I did come to terms in my teens or 20s and talk about it, there's nothing saying that acceptance wasn't going to be there. I just wasn't there from a sort of psychodevelopmental level.
How have you found it's changed over the years in terms of how it's impacted you?
Yeah, I think the physical components of it now, as a 33-year-old, are a lot more prevalent than they were even 4 or 5 years ago. Tourette's, for folks who are unfamiliar, it's characterized by uncontrollable involuntary motor and vocal, what we call tics, so movements or vocalizations.
Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah, of course. And growing up, there was pain from tics, and there were headaches that I would get at times. But now, as I kind of get, grow older, that pain is a lot more sustained and pervasive. And it's a lot harder to control. of folks with Tourette's, about 85% of them tend to enter a dormancy phase as they enter their mid-20s. Sometimes folks don't have tics at all for the rest of their lives. It waxes and wanes, but I'm one of about 15% of clinical patients with Tourette's that will have the active tics for my lifetime. So, with that comes a progression of the severity and the intensity of them. So as I enter my early, now mid-30s, I'm seeing that more and more manifest in physical pain.
Okay, good. Thanks for sharing that.
Of course.
So what do you wish other people knew or understood about you in terms of Tourette's?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Emily. I think, I think back to the different, philosophies and orientations towards what it means to be a disabled person, even whether or not that's, appropriate language to use. I subscribe to the orientation that I do identify as a disabled person. And I think that the reason for that is because a lot of folks have fought really, really hard to put legislation, policies, structures in place to protect folks who are disabled or who do identify as, having a disability. And I respect that. I respect that a lot. And I think that, part of the reason I identify as such is because I'm proud of, having a disability. I'm proud of having Tourette syndrome. And I think that to, say that it doesn't get in the way of things or to say it doesn't exist, for me personally at least, isn't true, right? And I think that sometimes, folks, do kind of subscribe to that version of things, right? Like, this, causes XYZ symptoms. It can't get in the way of ABC daily tasks, right? I think so. I would want folks to know that, each situation is very individualistic, and the legal and the structures that are in place because of folks who have fought so hard should be embraced and recognized. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I guess one of my other questions is, as a staff member at the university, have you connected at all with students on campus who have Tourette's, and have you talked to them about their experiences? Have you guys sort of shared what that was like?
Yeah. I have. So I get the opportunity of working with our resident assistants and some other student staff members in the Department of Resident Life, as well as just different folks, student leaders across the university. And I've had probably about 5 or 6 instances where students will actually approach me and, ask about it. And it's usually after I disclose, after I share. Usually I'll start my trainings and my presentations with that disclaimer. I'm going to be moving a bunch of different ways. It's going to look like I'm gasping for air or whatever tic is at play that day. Don't worry about it. And I try to make it humorous, like, oh, it's my 10th cup of coffee, or, it's the way, my brain is. But I always disclose that when I'm meeting somebody for the first time for a sustained relationship, or during trainings or presentations. So, going back to your question, sometimes after that, students, particularly undergraduate students, will come up to me and ask about it. And, there's countless times where they say, my brother, my sister, my cousin, my aunt, my uncle, etc., has Tourette's. And, they might not be in a space where they're willing to talk about it. So I've got the really, really cool and special opportunity to connect with some folks who either are directly impacted or know others who are.
I think that's great. I think always learning about someone's firsthand experience and hearing about that is a really great way for people to learn. I often find when I do presentations to faculty and I start talking about disability, someone will chime in and say, oh, my so-and-so has this disability, so this is no big deal. I'm happy to help, do what I need to do, right? And it's those firsthand experiences, I think, that people really learn from and really pick up on and say, oh, well, if they can handle this, so can I, right?
Yeah.
So I think the more we can communicate that around campus, the better, which would be great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what have been some of your biggest challenges and how have you worked through them?
I think on a personal level, by virtue of having just excessive and intensive movements, and they're getting a little worse now because sometimes, folks with Tourette's, when either they're around other folks with it or when they talk about it, and it tends to get a little worse, and I prep for that, so that's okay. But, I think sometimes just the daily functional things that I have to do, so driving, in some cases walking, sometimes eating or drinking, will tend to be affected by just the excessive movement, or I don't necessarily have the verbalizations or the vocalizations in public, but sometimes in my personal space I will. So sometimes it might be a matter of a grunt or some kind of tick that lets itself out in the middle of Giant or in the middle of Target, and there's sometimes looks, but I think a lot of the personal challenges I've encountered, I've worked through by educating folks. It's not to say I'm going to educate every time I go through the cash register at Giant, but it is to say that, if folks do ask about it, I'll give the quick kind of explanation as to what it is. I think a lot about accommodations in society, and honestly, Emily, prior to 2 years ago, I refused to seek them. I was very much in the orientation that I got this. I didn't need them so far in life. Why do I need them now at 30 years old? And I had to really sit down and be true and honest with myself and say, I don't know why I need them, but I do. That's where I'm at. So, an example I think of is driving. It's hard to drive with excessive and in some cases intensive tics. So I worked with my doctor to get a Metro disability card to ride the bus and to ride the Metro, with a recognized disability. So I'm taking more and more advantages of accommodations in society, notably under the ADA, which again sort of informs my orientation towards how I think about my disability in the first place. But I'm taking more advantage of those accommodations than I otherwise might have, or that I otherwise would have told myself that I needed. When it comes to work, I'm blessed and thankful to be in a space where I'm nothing but supported. And I think a lot of my challenges at work are either internally sort of fused. So I get that, internal self-esteem, sort of shame, or when it comes to external stakeholders sometimes. So I work a lot with different folks outside of the university, or folks who I might not have met, or that I'll meet for only 1 or 2 meetings. And sometimes, it's a juggling act as to whether I disclose and I share, or I just, do the 30-minute meeting and never see them again. So,
Ray, you've given me lots of questions to ask you, so
sure.
but I'm not going to ask you all of them.
Sure.
But I think one of the things that really valid point you made was that you weren't sure that you needed accommodations, but you knew you needed something, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that I find students with disabilities are really unsure about, especially when they come to college, right? Because what I tell people all the time is that you're going to have a disability for your entire life, whether it's a cognitive disability, a physical disability, whether it's visible to the human eye or not, mm-hmm. right? And it's going to manifest itself in different ways throughout your lifetime. And oftentimes, I could just give you an example. Oftentimes, people think of learning disabilities and attention deficit disorder and things of that nature mm-hmm. as only academic related, right? But I share with people a lot that it's not. You're going to find as you move on through life that it's going to impact you in ways with relationships, with your job, in other ways you hadn't expected. And I think that that's a big surprise to a lot of people. And so I always share that it's really important to at least request the accommodations you think you need. And it's always up to you whether you use them or not, but that's critically important.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that, Emily. And, one thing I kind of think of as you're kind of explaining that there's this concept that I've sort of told myself the past few years, and it's this notion of relearning what it means to live with a disability. And I specifically use the word relearning for me personally in my 30s, relearning a lot of the things that I did sort of learn at 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. And I think of our students, I think of students in such a pivotal, perhaps one of the most pivotal psychosocial, emotional places of their lives, right? Going from high school to college, or from college to deeper in college, or from college to post, college life, whatever that looks like, maybe perhaps at the graduate level, and what comes with that, right? And the need to really, in a lot of ways, relearn what it means, to live with a disability. Perhaps you had some learning prior, perhaps you didn't, right? But what does it mean with the circumstances at play right then and there?
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you another question, if you don't mind sharing. You had mentioned that you when you were talking about your Tourette's and the tics, and you're saying that you prepped for this. Are you willing to share anything about what that means, what that looks like?
Yeah. So, Tourette's, it's an interesting disability. So, there's a lot, there's so much that goes into it. Then there's the confusing part about it for researchers and clinicians and, Tourette's educators, that there's really no rhyme or reason to it. The tics could be bad or good when you're excited or scared or nervous or all of the above and none of the above. So, at 33 now, having Tourette's all my life, I've come to predict certain situations where my tics would get worse. So, I work with a lot of youth with Tourette's up at Rutgers, and I go up to New Jersey a few times a year to work with them. And every time I go up there, I know that being in a space with 50 other folks with Tourette's, my tics are going to be really bad. And similarly, talking about it when I do trainings or opportunities like this, I know that my tics will get worse by virtue of talking about it, and I'm okay with that because I love talking about it. But a lot of the pre-work that I've done, particularly before today, are sort of meditative exercises. So breathing a little bit, sort of mentally prepping myself that my tics are going to get worse. Sometimes when my tics get worse, unexpectedly, it rises some of my comorbidities, like my anxiety or my panic. So a lot of the mental and psychoeducational pre-work before today was helping me understand that they will get worse. And when they do, that's not unexpected, right? Because going into the situation, your tics are going to be exacerbated just because you're talking about it. And that's okay, because probably shortly after it, they'll tame out again, and when I go back and check my email, they'll get worse again, and but no,
checking your emails is stressful,
right? But no, so yeah, it's a lot of psychoeducational work to myself that I have to do prior to that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
I'm just going to give you the opportunity to have the last word. If there's any other things you want to share about yourself, your experiences here at Maryland, or anything in general about life with a disability.
Yeah, thank you so much. And, first and foremost, thank you to you and to Alice and to everybody. Like, this is a fantastic opportunity. And thank you, Emily, for all your work and your advocacy and this series. And, as kind of closing thoughts, I think that, I always tell the youth that I work with, a lot of the youth I work with are leaders, and they're going to do advocacy work and going out into the community, going to hospitals, talking to doctors and teachers about Tourette's. And one of the things I always tell them is that if I was in their situation, if I had the resources at their age to go out into the community, to do presentations, to talk about Tourette's, all the time, I wouldn't do that. And I always followed up by saying that I wasn't at a developmental level and a sort of I don't want to use the word maturity, but at a psychodevelopmental level to do that when I was their age. And I usually follow it up with giving them all the credit in the world, because that's such a hard and brave and courageous thing to do. And I think I also want to extrapolate that kind of piece of feedback I give to them, because every situation, right, is different, whether it's a neurological disability, a cognitive, like you were saying, physical, mobility, etc. So I think, holding on to the notion that, one blanket solution and response doesn't cover everything, nor should it, but approaching things with an individualistic mindset is so important, both for society and the community and each individual person living with a disability, right? The level to which they want to disclose, the level to which they want to request accommodations. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you, Ray. I really appreciate that. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Of course, thank you.
We really appreciate that, and thank everyone for listening today. For more information on disabilities, we have a great website at the university called accessibility.umd.edu, and you can find more information there, and we hope to see you at our next podcast. Thanks so much for joining.